Welcome or welcome back to SIP Forum. We are now in the session Company Experiences Running Diversity Programs. I'll hand it on to Suzanne Harrison from Percipient and also US IPA.
Great. Well, hello everybody, and we're closing in on the afternoon, so you're ready for a fun, fascinating session that for the first time doesn't involve me. So I'm going to tell you that you've been hearing from me a lot, that's why. We have two of our pledgee companies here, John Mulgrew from Lenovo and Jeremiah Chan from Meta. John leads the IP group at Lenovo. I don't know, John, every time I talk to you, you seem to be getting more accolades and more like, I don't know, are you running the company now?
I don't know what no, I'm not running the company. No.
And Jeremiah leads the patent team and all of those different aspects at Meta. And they're going to tell you a little bit about what they've been doing regarding the pledge and about looking at increasing diversity and innovation and inventorship in their country and their company. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you're going to go first, John?
Yeah, I think so. Is that right, Jeremiah? Is that what? Okay. So thank you, Suzanne. And I'll just say, first of all, I think Jeremiah and I both will say something similar, that we got involved in this a while ago, back when the first Progress and Potential report came out in the United States. And so for me, at least, seeing the pledge is like this milestone. Being part of the pledge, I'm certainly honored and delighted to be part of the pledge. It's something that this is something that I care a lot about. And I think Jeremiah feels exactly the same way, and I'm sure he'll yep, there he goes. And so, so to me, like, I feel like what my own experience with this issue is that I was completely unaware of it being an issue until I started seeing data about this. And then once I saw the data, it was undeniable. And I thought, well, I have an ability to have an impact here, so I'm gonna spend some of my time trying to make an impact. So that's sort of how I got involved in this. It was sort of an introduction to the issue, and then once I saw the data, it became very clear to me that I needed to try to work on changing things. And I was at Uber at the time, and I started working on collecting the data for Uber. And there were a lot of challenges to doing that, but I think Sam Shu at Uber has done an amazing job as Uber as a pledge company as well. And now I'm at Lenovo, we're doing the same thing. We're trying to collect the data and report out what we've seen so far. So let me see if I can share my screen. So what these slides are, these are slides that Jeremiah and I co-presented on this issue a while ago. For a handful of companies in the Bay Area. And so really what we were asked was to try to talk about 6 different questions. Why do we get involved? How do we get our data? What are the challenges that we've been overcoming, and what's ahead of us for challenges? What does our data show? What have we seen so far? And how do we get sponsorship at the senior level of the company? And are there any takeaway lessons to learn? So to me, I view this as an interactive conversation. So I'm gonna rattle on and talk, but at any point, if people have a question, you should just ask, because certainly, we're more than happy to talk about our experiences. So let me go to the next slide. Why did you decide to focus on diversity and inclusion? I just mentioned a minute ago. Jeremiah and I both have a very similar origin story on this. We both went to the same meeting in the Bay Area. I think Jeremiah was smart enough to have a photo of it, and I did not take a photo of it. He knew it was going to be one of those watershed moments, and I was just going to a meeting. I was like, well, I'll go to this thing and see what it is. But I think for both of us, it's a very profound impact on what we decided to do in our careers. I'm very committed to doing this in my careers, to try to provide more access to innovation, protection generally. That's where I started from. It's the right thing to do. But now that I've seen some of the numbers, it's the single biggest opportunity to improve the quality of Lenovo's portfolio. I think the same thing about Uber's portfolio. I suspect it's true for most companies, that if you can figure out, if you can identify whether or not there are large groups of people who are not participating in the innovation protection process, if you see that data, that is the biggest way that if you can then turn it on, that's the biggest way to create higher value in your portfolio. So it's both the right thing to do, and it's also probably the most impactful thing you can do for the company. I know, Jeremiah, if you want to weigh in anytime, please do. It's fine with me if we want to go back and forth or one at a time. This is a progress and potential report. If anyone has not seen it or hasn't read it or needs a copy of it, please reach out. I'd be happy to provide it. You know, when I was at Uber, when I saw the report, and Uber was not in the report, so my first thought was I'd like to try to mirror the methodology that's in the report and see where Uber is. And so I did that, and it turned out that we were right in the pack with a lot of other companies. We were not number one, we were not at the bottom, but it was the beginning of just understanding the data, which is super challenging. At Uber, at least for me, it was an extremely manual process trying to collect information and generate these reports. And now I'm at a point where at Lenovo, I'm really happy to say that we have integrated a lot of information through our docketing process so we can actually generate automated reports. So how do we do that? How do we get the data? So the thing that I've done this twice now, right? So I did it at Uber, and now I've done it at Lenovo. I did it differently at Lenovo than I did at Uber, and I had much better success. What I did was I showed leadership within the legal department what the possibility is. We did a small sample of information, and we showed our results. And Laura Catella was my boss. She was very excited about that. So she became a sponsor for this effort, and she brought in our diversity officer to look at the results. They were very excited about it. And so we worked our way into sponsorship at a very high level by showing what the potential was for improving our inclusion and for improving the quality of our portfolio. I think many of you, if you try to do this, will encounter pushback like, what if the data shows that we're not in a good place? Or maybe, for example, there may be some people who raise GDPR privacy issues or other obstacles. And I think most of these obstacles can be overcome. I will say that I often encounter people at other companies who say, I don't want to do this because I'm afraid of what I will see. And to me, again, it goes back to whether you want, if you're going to be able to improve the quality of your portfolio, you have to be willing to look with a sober eye at the data and see where you really are. So that's why I'm very happy to say Lenovo is the philosophy we have is we are where we are, and we're not going to be able to improve unless we know that. So we spent about a year trying to understand where we are. And now we're starting to work on trying different things to see how we can improve. So we actually have, we worked with different people, privacy team, IP Folio is our docketing software that we use to collect the data and manage it in a way that did not raise compliance concerns with anyone. And we now are able to, we have the diversity office supporting us in this activity. So I'm going to skip over some of these slides. This is simply, these are some of the slides that we showed from the report. You can see that there is a decline of gender mixed inventor teams. We don't see that at Lenovo. I'll have some data to show you in a minute. We have most of our inventors most of our female inventors participate in teams, and the teams are diverse. There are some sub-trends in there that I'll also be able to talk about. So some of the challenges we faced since I think in the beginning, there are really two paths you can put yourself on. One is I'm going to go try to change things, and I'm going to run a special program to try. Let's take gender as an example. I'm going to run a program to try to collect ideas from more women in the company. And so you might have a special session, brainstorming session, whatever you might want to call it, patent forwarding or whatever it is. And then the other path you can be on is I'm going to look at the data first. I'm going to try to collect the data and understand the data. I'm not going to change anything yet, but once I have the data, then I'm going to try to change something. So I think Jeremiah and I are interesting together because I think Jeremiah has experiences trying to change things early on, and then I think we're both landing in a very similar place, but we got there in different ways. I definitely started at Uber with knowing the data, and at Lenovo for sure understanding the data, and we're only just now starting to think about how we can change things. So we're way behind Meta on being able to know what to change, but we have a pretty good grasp on our data, and I think Meta now has a very good grasp on their data, and they're well positioned for changing. So I think you should choose. My recommendation is that my definite recommendation is you should look. You should try to understand the data at some level. And I personally found that we're understanding where I was, where the team was an easier path. It had less resistance. It had less likelihood of everything that could lead to failure was in my control to avoid. Whereas trying something different, I think Jeremiah might talk about this. Some things worked, some things didn't work, and it might have been easier for some others, not Jeremiah, to say, "Gee, this isn't working. Let's stop." So I recommend looking at the data, and it's a task. It's a really big task. So I'll just show you what we have in our data. We decided to shamelessly steal from Facebook, from Meta, their funnel and their concept. So they had this concept before us, but we liked it so much that we just took it. You take the flow. Think of inventorship as a pipeline. There's a beginning of the pipeline. There's an ending of the pipeline for purposes of our conversation. Now, there's an earlier stage. There's a recruiting issue. There's a bunch of other things that are earlier than this pipeline for patenting, and there are things that happen afterwards that are also going to have an impact on the diversity and inclusiveness of the team of a company's team. But for purposes of patent innovation, we're looking at just the point of time when an inventor comes forward and says, "I have an idea. I have an idea. I think it might be patentable," all the way through to the point of whether we decide to file more than one application, more than one patent on the idea. So we've taken we've made 4 different milestones: disclosures, when someone decides that they're going to come forward with their idea; applications is really the stage where we have a committee process. So the invention disclosures are submitted to a committee. The committee then reviews them all, and the patent team is included, but it's also the business. There's a decision that comes out of applications, which is, maybe half of the ideas are selected for moving forward in filings. So that's a milestone where we want to see whether there's any potential bias there. And then during prosecution, we think there's a possibility for different treatment. And then the last stage is just whether if we have successful first patent, will we file a second patent, and is there any impact by gender on that? So here's what we have. And again, this is sort of a high-level thumbnail. We're still constantly looking for ways to measure this in a more refined way, but this is a breakdown by gender for U.S. inventors only, and that is you can see that 7. This orange bar here represent all of the instances where at least one woman is on a patent application. So you see that we have if you just take a team perspective, it's about 16-17%. If you just take the number of people, men versus women, it's more like, I think, 9% or 10%. So we're below the average based on the Progress and Potential report. But what's really interesting for us is that we see that predominantly when a woman participates in our innovation processes, it's predominantly a mixed team of people. You see that big purple block is, that's about 16% or 15% of our innovations where there's a woman involved. It's a team, and only a very small number, less than 1%. That should be a less than right there. I'm sorry for that. Is what's the color? Female team. There's more than one woman working together, and it's only women. That little sliver is that represents that. And then you have about 1% is just a woman by herself coming up with an innovation. But you can see for men, it's predominantly, I mean, it's a huge number. Quite a number of them are male teams, as compared to this little teeny tiny sliver here. We have this gigantic blue box here. So we really see this as a sort of a first step to understand kind of how, at least at Lenovo, how women get involved in the innovation process. And to me, that looks like it's a team-oriented kind of way. So I'm going to move to the next slide unless anyone has any questions about this data. Okay. So the next one is you can take that, remember that little slide of 17%, you can take that and zoom in on it, and you can say, well, what's the ratio of the teams that are there? And so again, we just break it out 2 to 1, 1 to 4, 1 to 3, 1 to 2. We just have different ratios. We're just trying to understand, like, you know, what do these teams look like? So this is just an example of what we're trying to, what we're toying with. We're not sure how to use these metrics always, but we're trying to figure out how to measure everything. So when we look at the application stage metrics, just the decision that comes out. So we have things going in from a disclosure perspective, which we just talked about, and then we have decisions that come out of those disclosures out of the committees. And what we're seeing for decisions coming out of committee is that sort of at a pro rata basis, 74% of disclosures received, 74% of the women who submit ideas are moved forward for approval. And for men, it's about 76%. So there are some differences, but they're not as dramatic of a difference as the participation numbers that we see here. So one of the things we're focusing on is how do we get more disclosures? That's one of the priorities we've picked. We had these 4 milestones and we picked 2 to prioritize. This is one of them, but the actual selection process by committees, we feel like we think it's working reasonably well because we're not seeing any data that suggests that there's something wrong. So we prioritize this one lower. And then throughout the prosecution process, we also check to see if there's any kind of differences. And so we look, for example, at the point of grant. You know, when a patent issues, is there a difference in that stat, that separation between men and women? And we do see a pretty significant difference of the applications for women where a woman is an inventor. We have a 66% sort of success rate, think of it that way. So about 1/3 of the applications do not make it through to grant. Whereas with men, it's about 4 out of 5 make it through to grant. And we don't really know why. There's lots of people who quickly offer an opinion, but I would say I don't know why. And I personally, just my gut feeling is it's not a quality issue. It's not that women have worse ideas than men or something. There's something, I think something else going on, but I don't know what it is. And that's because I started our process from a data collection perspective, not on a methodology of changing anything perspective. So we're just starting now to try to figure out why these numbers are different. But we think that a 10%, 14% difference is significant enough that we make it a priority to understand. So this is another one of our priorities.
Hey, John, we have a, can I throw a question in from the chat?
Yeah, of course.
So what are the gender perspectives of the total R&D/engineering teams as compared to those people represented on the patent shown in your first slide? So do you find the R&D teams to be more gender, I guess, I don't know. Do you find that you have more women in R&D than you have inventors, women inventors?
Yes. Yeah, we do. We do. I think we're very typical. I think most of us, look, I think most people, I'll admit I'll be the first to admit this. I wasn't looking at this. I didn't think about this issue until someone pointed out the data at a national stage. And then I was at Uber and I thought, well, let me just look and see whether I had this problem at Uber. I'll see, let's look at the data. And sure enough, we had a disparity between the percentage of women in technical roles where we expect innovation versus the percentage of women who are actually participating in the patent system. So please don't hold me to this. I think that it's at Uber, it was roughly 23% of the technical roles for women, but only I think about 10 or 12% were inventors. And so there's roughly half of the women who work in innovation roles were not participating in any patent disclosure or protection process that comes after disclosure. At Lenovo, I think it's about half again. I think it's probably around 20-something%. We have a D&I report. I have to go back and check what it is. But I think it's about half of the women in the workforces where we expect innovation are participating in the innovation process.
It's a similar story at Meta as well. And now that we've, I know for me, now that we've talked to so many different companies, it's definitely a trend.
Yeah, I think Jeremiah, when did you realize it? Was it after you looked at the data, or did you just know when you went to the project potential meeting, do you already know that you probably have this issue, or did you discover it after you looked at data? When did you learn about this?
Well, I would say a couple things. One is the process was very similar. So after the meeting we were both at, we basically said we need to look at this, and then we did. But what I find is interesting is, and I do appreciate your approach of always trying to be very objective to say something's going on here, let's take a look at it. The truth is, and I've heard this from many colleagues of mine, is when you look at so many other adjacencies and you see the inequity and bias, it's not that big of a leap to actually assume that something not good is going on. I mean, it's not truly something where, like, it could be a variety of different reasons. That is true, and we'll look at that and the data will show it. But the truth is, when you look at so many other adjacencies where they've actually shown, people have done studies and they've looked at the data and they've shown that the bias is real, the discrimination is real, and it's shown in the data in very similar types of areas, it's actually not surprising that your company, my company, and dozens of others all have this issue.
Yeah, I suspect that I think that, first of all, many companies are working on creating more diversity in the workforce, just full stop, hiring more diverse workforce. I think that's where a lot of companies are focusing most of their effort, and I totally applaud that. What I'm here to tell you is that that's not the end of the story. So if you have a diverse workforce, that is incredible. It's fantastic, and congratulations, because it's a huge milestone. But you might want to look at things like innovation, because it's a very measurable thing, to see whether or not there's any difference between the way, let's say, men versus women participate in the systems and processes that you have set up for your company to be successful. I'm going to guess, and I'm going to guess that I'll probably be right most of the time, that if you had a 50-50 diversity workforce, whatever your measurement is, whether it's, you will not see 50-50 participation in innovation. And so it's a clue, it's a hint to you that maybe something is going on inside your systems that might treat people differently. And it's just an opportunity. First of all, it's an opportunity to be better, to treat people better, and be a better company. But it's also, like, again, it's a value opportunity. If you had a 50-50 workforce, men and women, and only 10% of women are participating in a patent system, there's a 40% opportunity to capture better innovations than you're currently capturing in your portfolio. It's not that the first 10 are terrible, but if you have 5 times as many inventions to choose from, you're going to have better quality choices just through the virtual numbers of filings.
So John, we have a couple of questions come through.
Yeah.
So do you consider this an issue of diversity or inclusion / belonging? I'm going to say probably the latter, since.
Yeah, I think I would say when I was at Uber and still at Lenovo, I would like to see the workforce become more diverse. So for us, I think for my company and my prior company, I think hiring diversity is still a very important thing. But this issue is really, yes, I do think it's more about the internal processes that you have in place and whether people are taking advantage of them or feel welcomed or invited to participate. And I believe it's completely in my control to change our processes to make it more inclusive. And so it's not, I don't think this is an external thing that's like women are different than men and I'll never get them to participate. I just do not believe that. So I personally think it's an internal thing about inclusion that is in my control to improve. Now, Jeremiah, I think you probably want to weigh in on this too, since.
Oh no, I would totally agree. And even to your point, John, about, you know, lots of companies and firms are investing in promoting greater diversity in their workforces. I think that is true. I mean, you can look around and see lots of diversity reports that focus on that. But I've also talked to lots of firms and companies that actually look at their retention of those candidates, and it's really bad. I mean, I know it's true with law firms, it's true with companies. And so there is this issue of inclusion, right? How do you keep them? How do you make sure that they are thriving in the workforce once you hire them? And I do think, you know, for me, you know, part of the story I was going to share was when I met with our diversity team at Meta, one of the things that really kind of caught their attention was this idea of what we're talking about today being used as a measure of inclusivity. You know, we have lots of diversity metrics, but we frankly don't have a whole bunch to measure, you know, inclusivity outside of, you know, the fact that we know many of them are leaving, which is not good. But that, like, by that time, it's too late. And so looking at the rate of participation in these innovation programs like patenting and submitting ideas, I mean, part of it is, do they feel like they're a member of an innovation team? Like, are they invited to participate in the program, or are they not? And is there a gap? And I know for us and for you, there is a gap that we need to address. And that was something that caught their attention, I think, got them pretty excited to support it.
And then one other question is about, do you think about using AI as part of the patenting process can help with gender diversity? And John, maybe you want to take that one and talk a little bit about blinding the prosecution process that you did at Uber.
Yeah, first of all, I did not. That's Sam's work, all Sam Shu. So if you want to understand more about the blinding process at Uber, I'd be more than happy to introduce you to Sam Shu. I will not take credit for her work. She's awesome. She did it. So, but I do think, and I think Jeremiah, you tried this too. You have a disclosure process where you do not know who the inventors are, right? Did you do a pilot of this?
No, we did not.
Okay.
Definitely on the agenda, but there are. I think you're misremembering, because I mentioned to you that we talked to two other large companies that have done this.
Yeah.
And in both instances, I can tell you that the heads of those departments did not for a moment think that there would be bias, like let's say in the decision making around disclosures. Both of those companies that shared that they're doing this said that they found pretty significant bias.
Yeah, and what I would say is they made very different choices about what they would protect, and so I would, yes, I think that there's something going on with it could be I know when I worked at Microsoft before I worked at Uber, so I worked in 3 different companies, and at Microsoft, if there were some pretty well-known inventors and some pretty senior level executives, and you saw their name on a disclosure, the way you might treat that disclosure could be different, right? So it's just, I think it's human nature to have that sort of star effect from certain people. But now that I'm a little further along in my career, I wonder about the merit of that. I think having a process where you are just looking at the invention, the idea for the sake of the idea itself, should lead to higher value portfolio creation. And that's to me, that's where I actually want to spend most of my time, is trying to figure out how to improve quality. I think most patent people file 5 applications to get 1 good application, and they just feel like there's no way to improve those odds. And I would love to find ways to make it 3, so I only have to file 3 applications to get 1, or improve on wherever, the numbers game that we all seem to play in IP. And that's where AI, the second part of your question, Suzanne, comes in. I feel like AI can assist people in reading disclosures, reading claims, reading patent specifications, looking at examiner data, looking at a whole host of factors, and I would say nudge or guide the attorney. I personally believe that AI will not replace the attorney, but will help the attorney do a better job and make better decisions. I'm not the kind of person who says the attorney can disappear, but certainly there's been a lot of work on AI tools to help in the innovation process. I haven't seen one that reads disclosures and does a great job saying this disclosure is a good disclosure, this disclosure is not a good disclosure. So I personally favor committees. I think one person making a decision leads you to greater variation in quality than 5 people making a decision together. But an AI tool, like at Uber, we had AI tools for reading claims and looking at examiner information, and we would automate a process for advising an attorney whether or not we should respond to an office action. So I think AI tools have a place in our profession, and I think most of us don't have much experience with it yet, but I think it's going to come in the next couple of years. It's not far off, I don't think.
I think one comment, John, I'd make is this idea of the anonymized process, I think for me, really does highlight the power of unconscious bias. You know, I can tell you that the 2 companies I talked to, you know, the folks that wanted to implement the anonymized disclosure process met a lot of resistance, not from executives or management, but their own teams. The patent attorneys who make the decisions on disclosures all felt like this is a waste of time. You know, there's no bias here. We barely look at the names. We look at the ideas and we evaluate them on the merit of the invention. And they were pretty adamant that there was no bias and thought it was a waste of time and resource. Yeah. But this kind of goes back to my other example, John, where it's like, I appreciate you always saying like, I'm going to be objective here. We're going to figure out what's going on here. I mean, we got the famous resume experiment, right? That we all have hopefully read about now, where the social scientists proved that Emily, a resume with the name Emily on it, is more employable than the name Lakeisha. And a resume with the name Greg on it, exact same resume, identical, is more employable than a name with Jamal. You just change that name and it's changed. And I guarantee you that in most instances, if you have the hiring manager, they're going to say, no, come on, I'm not discriminating. There's no bias here. This is the power of the bias. This is the unconscious bias that exists even when intentions are good. And so this was my whole point about it's not that big of a leap to say something bad could be going on here when we have all these adjacent experiments that have already shown the bias exists. You know, whether or not you're evaluating resumes versus inventions, you got to be careful and you got to look at this. And I think it's very important. And I'm glad that Sam has done this. I'm glad that others have. We'd like to do it as well. To your last point about AI, and this is one very interesting thing that I learned from one of the behavioral science teams that I talked to. They worked with one company that found that disclosures from male inventors used certain phrases and terms far more than disclosures submitted by female inventors. And they were starting to look at whether or not those were some of the reasons why they were being accepted at a higher rate than the female inventors. They decided to work with the female inventors to have them change the vernacular. And sure enough, within a year, 15% increase in accepted disclosures by female inventors. So there is a lot going on here, as John has mentioned, but we need to be vigilant about really looking at the data and looking at what are some of the factors behind this and then addressing it.
I'd love to see people work on an AI tool that helps with the disclosure writing process. Because if what Jeremiah is saying is true, and I believe it is true, that's something we can solve with technology. We can help inventors articulate their invention better with AI tools as well. So I just think, like I said, I feel like there's a lot of room for improvement. I think this all goes to both a fairness issue, but also for me, a profound quality issue. And AI tools are useful for that. I also think AI tools allow us to be far more efficient and save a lot of money. I personally, my view is, I think I've worked at companies and I've been outside counsel for lots of companies that want to be in the top 5 or want to be the top 10. They have some external validation goal, and I'm just not there anymore. I'm much more about like, I need to know why I'm doing something and why that thing is going to have impact on the company. And so like a lot of my views on portfolio development have become much more focused on everything I need to do for an IP has to lead to success of the company. And to me, diversity of the workforce and representation inside our innovation process is so important for keeping talent in the company and having them be motivated and inspired to invent and create new things for the company. So that's how I explain it for myself. It's like, I think working on this issue has multiple payback to the business. It's just, it's a very complex issue, but I think working on it is so vital. So, okay, let me go back to, I don't know if I have any more slides. Let me see. Okay, so just again, just sort of recap, when we look at these 4 different milestones, we were not seeing much difference between men and women when it came to filing continuations or divisionals. So we prioritized that lower. That's on the prior slide. But we have decided that we're going to look at our disclosure process and our prosecution process to try to understand the differences in data that we're seeing. And I asked between the two, I personally feel like we're probably going to focus more of our time on disclosures because we have a more significant difference there than we do with prosecution. But we're going to work on both in the coming year. And probably ask Facebook what they did or Meta what they did so we can copy them once again, because I think, again, you guys have tried different things that we haven't tried yet. So, you know, how do we get management buy-in is one of the questions. And it wasn't hard at Lenovo. It's one of the things I really like about the company. We did do a small study. We had some summer people come in, and we decided we would run a small study to see if the issue was at Lenovo. We had an inclusion issue at Lenovo. I was fully expecting that we would conclude that we would. I think most companies, when they look at the data, they will conclude the same thing, that there is an opportunity there. And then we presented it internally, and we got very quick buy-in on that. We certainly have other goals. I've listed some of them down here that relate to you know, fairness and diversity and inclusion, not just at the innovation level, but also executive representation, you know, and other ways. We have multiple KPIs that we have for this issue, but you know, we work with Cal very closely on how what we're doing in innovation inclusion can help achieve the larger mission for the company for inclusion. So lessons learned. I think the formula is simple. There's really 2 things that I think are critical to work on. First is to figure out how to have data that you can use to understand what the issue is for you. What are the issues that you might find if you did this funnel approach like we did when we copied Facebook? We had 2 out of 4 that we wanted to work on. I do not think that every company has the same 2 out of 4 things to work on. I think it'll be different things for different groups. Some groups might have committees that are not as good as you'd like them to be, for example, but you might have great disclosure participation. So meaningful data is really important. And then combining that with an action plan. Now, I will tell you that we are on the beginning part of our journey on meaningful actions. We focused on the first half of the equation, and now we're working on the second half. And I'm really counting on other pledge members to share their experiences with me and with the rest of the IP team at Lenovo to tell us what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them, so that we can try to make choices about what to work on first that have a higher chance of success. So to me, like the complexity of this issue is vast and never ending, you know, but if you focus, if you can collapse it down into 2 things. One is, how do I work on getting the data? And once I have the data, what can I do with that data? That to me is the formula for success for getting to a result that's meaningful. And I fully believe that we're going to be able to achieve that at Lenovo. We'll be able to increase participation in the innovation process. And who knows, maybe we'll even have an increase overall for men and women. Like I think our changes could mean that more people who are innovating would just participate anyway, no matter who they are. I think that's it for me. Yeah, that's all of my slides. So I'll just say thank you again. And now it's time for the real show for Jeremiah. He's a better presenter. He's got more interesting stuff for me, for you to see than me. So thanks.
No pressure, Jeremiah.
Yeah, he's great.
I think you need to stop your slide share.
I stopped.
While you're setting up, Jeremiah, I think there was one question just about, do you see different decisions being made by female versus male attorneys? And maybe you can even comment about how you work outside counsel into this process as well.
You want to answer, Jeremiah, or do you want me to go?
I can go first. So
Okay.
one, I would say it's interesting. There's one DEI consultant that I've kind of talked to and spent a lot of time with. His name is Jason Thompson. He has a group called Cape Inclusion. They actually do bias assessments for individuals and managers. So it's interesting to this point about, like, did you look at male and female attorneys? My guess would be that every individual has their own set of biases. And what Jason does, really interesting, he's worked with a number of very big organizations, including the International Olympic Committee. They find that people have different biases and need to be trained in different ways. And so they may have a bias that's more focused on gender bias. They may have a focus that's more kind of ethnic bias, but they look at it and then try to address it in more customized ways, rather than what I think most companies do, which is kind of peanut butter, one size fits all for everybody. You take a 30-minute class and then you're all good. So my answer to this is, I'm pretty sure you'd probably find biases, but it's probably individual dependent. Whether or not it's, can be applied generally to female or male patent attorneys, I don't know. I haven't looked at that specifically.
Thanks.
I think it makes a difference.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, thanks a lot. I think it's interesting that you mentioned it, that it's really probably individual. And thanks for the reference to the other person.
Yeah, what he found in the course of this training is that, what the assessment on the bias evaluation showed them actually proved out in terms of hiring and attrition. So they found, like, certain managers that had a pretty heavy gender bias, when they actually looked at the data with respect to the females leaving their organizations, lo and behold, a higher rate of female attrition. So I think that is, and this is something I've talked to a number of organizations on, like, I think looking at that data and really understanding the unique nature of the problem by individual is one of the keys to actually meaningful change. I think one of the reasons why we have slower rate of change is because right now it's too generalized, the approach with respect to DEI training, and making sure that people are not, really giving into those biases or not paying attention to them.
I don't have much to add except one thing, which is I think to me, the most important factor in the success of a patent attorney to represent people is the ability to connect and have a relationship, a strong trust relationship with the client, with the inventor, with the executives, and so on. So the relationship skills are where all the action is for doing a good job. And so I personally believe that there could be any number of things that can cause that relationship to be strong or weaker than it should be. And gender might be one of those things. I know that I worked at a law firm before going to Microsoft that had a women's apparel client. And the women's apparel client had, not surprisingly, I think, many inventors who were women. And so the women's apparel company asked my firm to have only or predominantly female attorneys working on the innovations. And to me, I saw, like, the people could have a connection, they could have an appreciation for the invention faster, and for whatever number of reasons, the relationships that they formed with the inventors were faster and deeper. So to me, I'm not going to tell you I had this worked out. All I can tell you is that I think it is a factor, and I personally believe that at least in the U.S., the workforce in IP lacks sufficient diversity. And so Jeremiah is working on something to try to address that, through sponsoring and promoting diverse people to enter into this profession. I think the more that our profession can be diverse, the more likely we're going to be able to match up well with these different clients who have their own different needs and different relationship needs as well. So to me, yes, absolutely, I think this is a factor. I've worked at 3 companies now. We've tried at all 3 companies to create more diversity in the legal profession. It is just as difficult of a problem to solve as getting diverse inclusion in inventorship. It is not an easy, like, I'm just going to hire women to represent me, and I'm going to demand a law firm to have a woman be on the account. I've worked in law firms where that's been imposed on law firms, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. These are really complicated generational issues to work through. So the answer is yes, but I wish I could tell you what to do. I do not know what to do yet. I just know that it's an issue.
John, I don't know if you mentioned women's apparel. I don't know if you were actually citing the example of the Spanx.
No, it was a
Oh,
different
okay.
one. It's a different one.
Well,
I was, the reason why I know this is because I was added to the account because I was drafting a lot of applications. So I was added to the account and I went to a call, and it was I think 10 women on the call, and I joined the call, 10 women for the client, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Yeah, what am I doing here? I don't understand like why seamless apparel is so important." And so I personally realized, yeah, I'm not the right person. I usually try to really understand inventions and I get really excited about people's innovations, but sometimes I'm not the right person. Like I think that's important for us all to recognize as professionals.
well, I'm glad you recognized it in the moment. I mean, if people haven't heard of the famous example, it's Sarah Blakely, who's the CEO of Spanx, who's now sold her company for billions of dollars. She has a very famous story about this, but when she was starting out and looking for patent attorneys, number one, in the state of Georgia, she was looking for a female patent attorney, couldn't find a single female patent attorney. She ultimately went to a number of male patent attorneys, most of whom all said, your idea is not patentable. And the story goes that one of the male patent attorneys that she sought advice on, he had a daughter, and the daughter like looked over his shoulder and was like, "Dad, that's incredible. Like, do you not understand? Like, women are going to be killing for this." And based on that daughter's input, the father was like, "Okay, let's take a closer look at this." And sure enough, now you have Spanx, $1 billion, hugely successful. And Sarah Blakely talks about the story. It's just a classic example of that lack of diversity. You're missing out on a perspective. I'm glad that John in the moment realized I'm not the right person. Let's get the right person here. But oftentimes people don't do that. People don't have the sense to do that. Let's get the right person here. When they're in their mind, they might be thinking, oh, I know how to assess whether or not something's patentable or not. It doesn't really matter what the invention is. Not always true. And it wasn't true in the case of Spanx.
I will just add that I think, again, this is an issue that lends itself well to measurement. And if there's lots of data about the performance of attorneys, at least in the United States, the data is very accessible. And so if you're trying to select counsel, you could meet with them and have a conversation and see how you feel about the person. I'm not going to discredit that. That's important, that the relationship you have with your attorney really matters. It needs to be healthy. But you could also look at a lot of data to narrow the field down to a smaller handful of people that have a proven track record. And I don't know that many companies that do that yet, but certainly it is out there. And I definitely believe that it is not true that there aren't any women in the profession or people of color in the profession. But I just think that we need to expand it and improve it. But I think that using data to help make these choices is super critical, just like it is for understanding inventor diversity. Using data to understand the legal profession, I think that's the path. I just don't have time to do it, but I believe someone will. We have a policy at Lenovo for increasing diversity of our profession, our legal providers. I would love to see data bolted onto that so we can actually measure stuff better. But I'm focused on innovation within the inventor community. But I do think these problems are very, very similar. Okay, so there's a question in the chat about worldwide versus US. I'm not sure who asked the question. Stephen did, I think. And I didn't mention this, but Lenovo's a global company. Many of our inventors are in other countries. We decided we started with a small pilot. And then once we got buy-in from leadership of the company and multiple seats of leadership in the company, we then went back and collected all of our data. So we have worldwide data of our inventor community, not just US data. The reality is that if you're looking at like examination statistics and other stuff, the data in the US is easier to get. It's just easier to get. And we are focusing on gender right now because it is a variable that is uniform across region. Men and women are men and women in different places. Now we realize the world is not as binary as man versus woman. We're starting small with man, women, but we expect that we're going to get to a much more refined gradient for gender in the future. But we have a lot of Chinese inventors, and a lot of our Chinese inventors file in the United States. So one of the questions we encountered once we went to this worldwide data set was, what does it mean to be a diverse inventor if you're a Chinese inventor in China and you're filing in the United States? How do we count that? And so once you get the data, once you're able to collect data, then how to measure it, it has its own complexity. And so we're starting with gender because it's easier actually than things like ethnicity or other factors. We have three we're looking at: ethnicity, gender, and veteran status. All three of these are recognized in the United States, and we're going to measure all three. But we're starting with gender first because it's bigger than veteran status as an issue to deal with. And we see other companies working on it, so we can be together with other people and learn from them. And we have this complication in our portfolio of a diverse workforce that's geographically diverse. And so ethnicity becomes a really challenging problem to solve. I hope I answered the question, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I would say for ours as well, complex. Fortunately, we have a company-wide diversity team that's looking at kind of definition of diverse groups of people by region, it's different for every region, as John just mentioned. So we're kind of looking to them to lead that definition set, and then we'll kind of go with that with respect to looking at underrepresented inventors based on those diverse categories. All right, so the first thing I would say is I think John was being incredibly kind about following in Meta's footsteps. I would say, and hopefully some of you on this call already know it, John is a leader in this diversity and innovation. I would call it a movement. It's been very exciting. The pledge, the number of member companies on the pledge has been growing, and just there's so much interest in this topic now, I think in many ways because of the work John has done. So let me start off with that. I'm going to hopefully not spend too much time on my slides, because I think that you'll see a lot of similarities in what John covered. And I do see a lot of really great questions in the chat. So I do want to reserve, any time we have for some of the questions. But let me kind of go through this and feel free to interject, just like John mentioned, if you have any questions or comments as I go through this. So diversity and innovation at Meta, formerly Facebook, is something that really starts at the company. When I joined 3.5 years ago, the company was already very focused on a number of diversity initiatives. Most of them, and this is kind of highlights from our most recent annual diversity report, and I know many of your companies, including Lenovo, have their own as well. It's very focused on promoting a more diverse workforce. And for us, it's not just workforce, but it's also supply chain. So all of our partners and suppliers, making sure that they're kind of with us on this journey. And so we have requirements around diversity that we want to see in our supply chain. And then I would say, one thing that really kind of made me happy is in the course of a lot of these big events in the US around Black Lives Matter, and frankly, even globally, a number of changes happened around seeing more diversity in leadership roles. And so when you go to our annual company annual diversity report, you'll see actually specific measurable targets around what percentage of, let's say, Black leaders we want to see in senior roles at Meta. I was really happy to see that because I am a big fan of measurable results. I think without measurement, without being able to say, are we doing better? Are we doing worse? It's very hard to do this work and actually have a meaningful impact. So I'm glad to see that. We talked a little bit before during John's portion about the lack of inclusion metrics. I would say that was definitely something that caught the attention of our diversity team at Meta. When I brought some of the patent data, some of the data that we were seeing around the patent side, there's not a lot of inclusion metrics. And I think this is definitely one for people in technical roles that can provide some indication of, how much do they feel like they're part of the team? Do they feel like they're invited to participate in these innovation sessions? Are they in roles where they're able to have an impact, to be able to exercise creativity? I think there's a strong connection with people's happiness and sense of purpose at a job when they feel like they have a contribution to innovative things at a company like ours and many others. So that was definitely something that caught their attention. You'll see lots of different measurements if you go to our annual diversity report, by ethnicity in different roles. You'll see it by gender as well. And you can see it for technical roles, you can see it for non-technical roles, and you can see it for leadership roles. And the one comment I would make here is this is super helpful. I mean, when we were kind of starting out on the patent team looking at this data, it was really kind of hard to start from scratch. And if we didn't have all this data that the diversity team had already put together, it would have been really hard to understand the impact of it, right? Like what is the rate of patenting by ethnicity and gender relative to the number of people in certain roles? If we didn't have that ladder metric, it would have been really hard if we were going to have to start doing that from scratch. Really difficult. Now, there's still some issues around how they define technical roles or non-technical that we're kind of working through and understanding. But still, having a lot of that data and that work already done, it's been a tremendous benefit to my team and I. All right, so John talked a bit about how this all started, the origin story. I like that, that way he describes it. We were at this meeting together, and truth be told, I did have a sense that it was a big moment. We had Congresswoman Lufgren there, former Director Yanku was there, and we had a number of leaders from companies, including John, who I think was sitting across from me on the left in this picture. I knew it was a big deal. Is the first time that I've ever seen the USPTO publicly talk about this issue in an explicit way, and essentially say, who's going to do it? Who's going to bring this change? And kind of looking around the room. And I know for me that made a big impact on me, coming back to my team and saying, this just happened at this roundtable. There's a big issue here. Here's the data, and maybe we have a role to play. And I feel like John had the same reaction going back to his team. For me, there was kind of a convergence of another thing as well, which was, for each of us, and I've seen this individually, we all are on kind of separate journeys with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. For me, it's probably been a little bit over a decade where I feel like I've been intentional about learning more about these issues, reading books, attending classes, talking to different DEI educators. So for me, it was really interesting because I would say even just a few weeks before this roundtable, I had attended a week-long class, and this was a class being offered to certain leaders at Meta. It was all about inclusion, and it was all about kind of understanding the systems of inequity and oppression globally. And so for me, in many ways, my eyes were opened in the course of this class. And the thing that really struck me was at the very end when I had a private conversation with our facilitator, and she kind of looked at me straight in the eyes and said, you need to understand where you have privilege and power. And I think my immediate reaction was, I don't have any. Like privilege and power, me? And she goes, stop, you do. Just look at your role, look at the decision-making power you have. You have lots of privilege and power. You need to understand that, because that's where you have the ability to bring change. And that really sunk in for several days. And I remember really kind of grappling with that, first realizing, yes, I do. I actually do have lots of decision-making power within my organization and even in the industry. Frankly, having been practicing for so long in this space, much like John, I just realized I do have privilege and power. What am I going to do with that? And then we attend this meeting where, former Director Yanku is like, who's gonna step up and do something? It really was kind of a light switch went on. Suddenly between that challenge for you need to do something and then having that specific challenge at the roundtable really made an impression on me. And over the course of the days and weeks after that, I realized we have not just, the opportunity to do something, we have a responsibility. And so for me, the opportunity changing into responsibility was quite a big deal, quite a meaningful impact on me. Data. So John talked a lot about data. It hasn't been easy at Meta. I will say a lot of the groundwork that our diversity team has done has been really helpful. So we have the USPTO's progress and potential report, but having that couched against looking at a lot of the internal data from our annual diversity reports really helped us start to look at what is the representation and percentage of people in certain roles at the company. And so we started looking very closely at that. And then we started looking at our own data around inventorship. And to really kind of no surprise, we found that our data tracked pretty closely what was found in progress or potential. Overall, about 15% of all of Meta's inventors are female. And then over the course of time, you can see it kind of by year, we've been hovering, anywhere between 8 and 13% of female inventors. We've looked at this similar data for virtually all the ethnicities that are measured in our annual diversity report. And the truth is there is a gap with respect to every ethnicity. And what I mean by that is their representation in technical roles where we'd expect to find, inventions or invention disclosures is higher than their activity in the patent programs. So there is a gap for each and every ethnicity. All of this means that we are not being as inclusive as we can. And so I think for the patent team and each of the portfolio managers on my team that I work with, I think each and every person realized for themselves that they could be doing a better job of engaging underrepresented inventors. And that was really important to get everyone on the same page to say, let's do this work together. Some other charts that you can look at, these are all in our annual diversity report. A quick note on design thinking that's been really useful for me and my team. John mentioned before that, a lot of what we've done is right out of the gate when we saw the progress and potential report, we have, I think this is probably true for a lot of patent attorneys, many of whom have technical backgrounds or have former engineering careers. We like to see problems and just tackle them. Let's just go solve them.
Yeah.
And that was definitely true on my team. We had a number of folks who said, let's just go fix this problem. Let's have, big brainstorming sessions with all of our female inventors, invite them all. Let's print a bunch of swag and t-shirts and bring catering in and make it really inviting. And then let's capture as many ideas as possible and get their names on patent applications. So we tried doing this very early on. And I remember one of the first sessions that we planned, we had executive buy-in, we had, VPs at the company all broadcasting this throughout internal channels. We were all very excited. And then the day came, and I think we had 4 or 5 female inventors in a giant conference room that could probably house 1,000 people. I had people on my team that were on the verge of tears. We had hundreds of sandwiches that needed to be eaten. We had t-shirts, we had all sorts of things. People were like, oh my, what a disaster. And I still remember after kind of getting over that initial heartbreak, we all kind of sat down and we said, we need to go back to the drawing board. So we hired a design thinking facilitator. We took a full day, went offsite and did a design sprint. If folks on this call are not familiar with design thinking or design sprints, it's basically a framework for problem solving that really helps you look holistically at the problem. And I think one of the most important aspects of design thinking is a phase that they call empathy mapping, where you look at the community of people that you're trying to serve and you really try to create a representation of who you're trying to serve. We went through this phase in our design sprint, and I still remember the facilitator said, okay, Meta patent team, I want you all to write on the whiteboard, what do you think are the obstacles and the reasons why, female inventors are not, engaging with the patent programs at Meta? And so we got on the board for about 20 minutes and we were writing down all sorts of different, reasons. And many of these were assumptions that we all had. After 20 minutes, we all kind of sit back in our seats, and then the facilitator goes up to the board and with a big red marker starts Xing out all the reasons that we had written. And so we're all kind of scratching our heads saying, what's going on here? What are you doing? He said, well, as a part of this design sprint, I spent time interviewing a number of your female inventors before this session. I'm not seeing any reasons that they articulated to me about why they're not more active in your patent programs. And right there for us, it was a real eye-opening moment, right? There were lots of assumptions that we had as patent attorneys at Meta that were just not true. And the one example I'll give you, and I'm not saying this is generally a rule that can be applied to any company. For us, it turned out to be true, which is we had all sorts of reasons about, self-filtering ideas, not having enough confidence, being drowned out by their male colleagues. And the truth is, in the interviews that our design facilitator had with our female inventors, the number one reason actually was no time. So what they said, what they told our facilitator was that when they talked to a lot of their male colleagues in technical roles just like theirs, many of them were writing up their invention disclosures on nights and on weekends, and then submitting them, and then getting all the accolades and the bonuses that come with that process. They just didn't have any time. Many of them were taking care of their kids, and they were dealing with all sorts of home responsibilities during the weekends. And when you look at that compared to some of the data coming out of organizations that have studied the phenomenon, the impact of the pandemic, a lot of the data has shown that women disproportionately have felt the impact of home responsibilities and burdens during the pandemic more than ever. And women have been leaving the workforce at higher rates than males during the pandemic as well. This turned out to be very consistent with what we were hearing from our female inventors. And it was not something that we appreciated as our patent team. And again, so important because we in this situation are the decision makers. And so if we have no sense of what are the obstacles, what are the challenges that women are having, this is a real problem. I will mention that I did talk to another organization that actually discovered a very similar phenomenon in their organization. One thing that they tried and experimented with is they had these brainstorming sessions with their female inventors, but they actually changed it a bit. The way they advertised it was they presented some technical problem. They invited all of their female inventors to come, brainstorm ways to solve it. But they said very clearly up front, there is going to be no homework and there will be no work to do after the brainstorm session. We're going to do it all in the session. We're going to write up your disclosures with you, and then you're done. So give us 2 hours and then you're all done. And you can have some pizza and you can have a t-shirt. They had massive increases in their rate of participation from female inventors. So just one small tweak. And John mentioned this concept of nudge that was created by Richard Thaler. That is an example of a nudge. You change it a bit. You change kind of the language of the session. You change the nature and content of the session. And all of a sudden, if you are addressing some of the barriers that the specific barriers that the user community is facing, you may actually see a massive increase in engagement. John talked about this as well, so won't spend too much time on it. We really looked at our place in the pipeline. And I would say for me, I think about it as two levels. One is the ecosystem of innovation. You have early education, you have college and university schooling, you may have master's degrees or PhDs. You have a role at a company like ours. If they join a company like Meta, now we have a role to play in that innovation pipeline. And then you also have at the USPTO, their process and how they engage inventors. And I'm glad to say that the USPTO has over the last few years been really focused on this. Former Director Iancu started a committee that's focused on diversity and innovation. They call it innovation expansion, and we are continuing that. I serve on the PPAC, which is the advisory committee for the USPTO, and I've been on this committee working directly with the Innovation Council now for 2.5 years. And it's really impressive the commitment they've made and are going to continue to make in this area. So that's at the higher level for the innovation ecosystem. And then at the lower level within the company, we look at each stage of the innovation path and the patent program that inventors can participate in. And we find different barriers with respect to each stage. And John talked about this a bit. We're trying to dissect and analyze at every stage, are we being inclusive? Is there bias that's at play, and how do we address it? This goes to the inventor journey that we talk a lot about, that I think also goes to empathy mapping. One of the things that we're doing now that I'm very excited about is over the last 3 or 4 months, we've engaged a behavioral science team from a very reputable university. They're coming in and essentially auditing all of our programs. They're looking at our programs along the inventor journey, and they're kind of talking to our inventors. They've done probably 200 hours of interviews with different inventors. They're looking at data that we've already collected. So we've done surveys to our inventor community. I think at this point, we probably have responses from over 8,000 different inventors. We have lots of data, but to be honest with you, the reason why we decided to engage this behavioral science team is we were overwhelmed. And I want to make sure that people on this call, you don't feel overwhelmed. You have resources in John and I and Suzanne and Bo, lots of people you can talk to understand, like, where do you even start? That was kind of the situation we were in. We're kind of overwhelmed with all this data, but we brought in this team and now they're helping us kind of step by step, try out different nudges, measure the results of those nudges, and then really kind of audit our programs to understand, are they inclusive as they can be? And do we have bias at play at each of these stages? This is just kind of a fancy clustering diagram. We look at a lot of the relationships between the named inventors on different patents. One of the things I've shared, with John and others that I found interesting is there are lots of insights that can be garnered from these clustering maps. One of the things that we found right away, and I think it's pretty consistent with a couple of researchers, Professors Delgado and Murray, and something that they found within more of the academic setting, is that groups of inventors, you tend to find a bigger range of levels with all male inventors on a patent versus female inventors. So there is a smaller range of different job levels when you have patents with female inventors named on them compared to male inventors. Still trying to figure out why that is. I start to wonder whether or not there's less kind of mentoring happen with respect to navigating the patent process and the innovation process. But this is just one of many insights that we start to garner from the data that we look at and the help of the team that we've engaged. Failing fast and learning, I've talked a lot about this. We have failed a lot. We've tried lots of things that didn't work. And for us, it's been a motto for our team. We want to try as many things as possible and then learn from them and then continue to pivot. Right now, we've got a number of current initiatives that are underway. We've got a variety of targeted brainstorms with different inventor communities, inventor groups. We have, a follow-up to the diversity and innovation pledge and conference that we're doing, and hopefully we're going to be able to splinter off into different best practices groups that I'm very excited about, where we can learn from each other. I know that our team has learned a tremendous amount from just working closely with John's team and exchanging lots of best practices about, hey, what have you tried? What has worked? What hasn't worked for you? And then the last thing I just wanted to talk about, and John mentioned this before as well, which is part of this ecosystem, and again, part of where we have privilege and power, is the patent profession. If you look at the patent profession in the United States, there is pretty significant underrepresentation of women and people of color, even relative to the number of them who are attorneys, registered attorneys in the country. And so we've been looking closely at this, and one of the recent things we kicked off is a partnership with a nonprofit called the National Council for Patent Practicum. And what they do is they provide free patent prosecution training for STEM students of color. So basically, students of color who have a degree in a technical field, and it could be an undergraduate degree, it could be a master's degree, but we're offering them a chance to learn about patent prosecution, and then they can go on and do whatever they want with that certification. The way we've partnered with them is we've now pulled in some of our patent law firms, and we pulled in IBM as another company sponsor. And what we're doing is we're identifying candidates through this program that are getting the patent prosecution training. At the end of this program, a number of candidates are selected to do an internship with either Meta or IBM for about a month, where they shadow our patent teams. And at the end of that shadowing, they are placed with a permanent full-time position at one of our patent law firms. So this is a direct funnel into a full-time position as a tech advisor or patent agent at one of our patent law firms that we're giving work to. So eventually they will be doing patent prosecution work for companies like Meta or IBM. And again, this is just another area where we've heard from many of our underrepresented inventors. They often say, I've never seen a patent attorney that looks like someone like me. And it's tough when we feel like there's no one who looks like me who is a patent attorney in this space. We want to change that as well. And so again, it's the challenge of looking at the entire ecosystem where we may have power and privilege and saying, where can we bring change? Thanks.
Thank you, guys. That was great. I know we're at time, so if you have to, if anyone on the call has to leave, feel free to do so. But you are welcome to stay and ask some questions since we have these guys here. One of the questions, do you, sorry, I can't read where'd the question go? Sorry. Whoever just wrote the last question, do you want to put that in?
I think the program I mentioned here is one by Heritage that I came across, and it has a similar purpose. Maybe you know it already, but otherwise it might be nice to reach out to, I think there's 2 people in that fund that really sponsor and do this very actively with basically the same goal, which I really like that you put it up, like the pipeline program as well, and how you can help people to also do the internships and see then how the work is in practice.
Okay, great. That's great. We'll look into that. Thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you. I know the Heritage program well, and Paul Heritage, I think, went to law school with my boss, so there's a connection. We know.
Okay, yeah, yeah. He is really very active in this domain as well. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for these 2?
My question is a bit, because this is a lot of things are happening in the US, and it goes a bit to Stephen's question as well. How do you see Europe and Asia developing in this? Are they kind of taking similar approaches and initiatives, or are we, speaking for Europe, are we a bit behind?
So I'm going to try that first, and then I'll turn it over to you 2. I would say that in the US, it got kicked off because the USPTO did a report and started talking to companies. WIPO is now leading this charge and has someone, Lisa Jorgensen is the one leading that. I've been on a number of calls with both WIPO people, USPTO, UK IPO, Chilean, Canadian, so that other patent offices are really getting involved and trying to understand what this means for their economic growth and technological growth as a nation. I've had conversations with Japanese PTOs. So it's really beginning to gain steam. We, Bo and I are working with the EPO to actually get them to issue a similar report and start talking with companies. So as you saw, that was such a big moment for John and Jeremiah at that meeting. And so I'm confident that the EPO is going to begin working on this fairly soon. I'll go back to you guys, John and Jeremiah, to add more.
I'd like to see more progress. I'm not. I think I'm a patient person, but on this issue, I'm an impatient person. So I would love to see more progress. I think one of the issues will just be access to information. Is so for whatever reason, it is very easy for us to pull down data about ourselves and about our peers. And have a more complete conversation internally about kind of where we are, what we're doing in the United States than it is to do that for Asian offices in Asia, or perhaps in Europe. I think Europe might have a little bit more transparency about data. One way that offices can help is to help make the data accessible. I think that I really believe that if any company takes a look at their own information, they will be highly motivated to address this issue. Just have to look. And so I also think that some companies in an industry, any one industry, will get ahead and look, and then they will make progress, and then they will reveal to the world that they're making progress when other companies are not. And so I personally think that there's lots of reasons why you should do this, economic and it's the right thing to do. And also I think others will do it. But I think these offices around the world, if they want to help, the biggest way, or get involved, the biggest way, I think, is to provide some mechanism for seeing the data that they have. And I think it's going to happen. I think the US is sort of took a step out in front of everyone. And now you have this momentum in several companies on this pledge. I believe that other companies in other parts of the world are going to want to get involved in this, and it's just going to be demanded. I really think that's what's going to happen.
I would say +1 to everything John just said. I would say the other thing I would say is the patent offices, they talk frequently, and I can tell you the USPTO on the innovation expansion subcommittee and those folks working on it, Valencia Martin Wallace and others, they have been in touch with other patent offices. It's definitely front of mind for them. A little bit slow going, I would say, from my perspective too. But I would say, also thinking back to, when John, Suzanne, and I first started even talking about this issue, it was always envisioned that it would be a global strategy, because we know that the bias is not limited to the US only. We know that systems of oppression and inequity is a worldwide issue. But it's different, right? And we talked about kind of different definitions of diverse groups and the people and the marginalized folks and the experiences in each region. It's different. That doesn't mean that you can't address it. It just means you have to be thoughtful about how you do it to understand the issues. Again, going back to that empathy mapping, what is the marginalized community? What is the underrepresented group in each of those regions? And then start to tackle it with respect to specific measurable actions.
Great. We have a couple more questions, Eric and then Richard.
Yeah, hi everybody. So I had a bit of a thought, and I kind of posted the question in the chat higher up, which is that often senior members of a team are added to a patent application. I guess often, since they're sponsors of that project per se, even though they haven't necessarily been involved in actual, innovation and invention itself. How do you see that like inflating, in this case, male and probably even male white? I'm not sure exactly what all the data is, but you get this artificial inflation of who's involved in the team. How do you think about that, of the, so to say, the true innovators versus the sponsors?
I'll go first since I'm not on mute right now. So I think this is a much more significant problem than the managers understand. I think getting the inventors wrong significantly hampers the value of that asset. So if the manager is not really an inventor, at least in the US, then when you go to assert the patent, you might have a defect that requires correction before you can actually utilize the asset. And so my first, and I've dealt with this in all 3 companies that I've worked at. So I suspect that everybody who works in-house right now also experiences this problem. And it is a straight up quality problem on your portfolio. Just, I agree with you that it likely affects gender stats. But to me, like the more that I work on this, on inventor diversity, the more I frame it as a quality of the portfolio issue. More and more, like I started off with, this is the right thing to do. I need to do this. I have the ability to make a change. And now I'm like, man, I can make so much of a difference in the quality of the portfolio by fixing quality issues. This is a quality issue. So that that dynamic is a real problem. I do think that the blinding, like eliminating names from the selection process, can help address that issue. I do think sometimes people put their manager on there because they think it'll get through better by having the manager's name on there. Sometimes it's the manager that does it. Sometimes it's the inventor who does it. I do think one of the things that we're trying to measure at Lenovo is not just gender diversity or ethnicity or veteran status straight just as a category, but what level are they in the organization? So I would like to understand, sure, maybe we have 12% female inventors versus 88% male inventors or something like that. Where are those women? Are they in the bottom third of our engineering workforce? Are they in the middle or the top third? What's the dynamic? And I also would like to measure within each business unit, like there may be 12% women and 88% men, but are all 12% in one business group and the others are 100 and 0? Like those things, those measurements are on the drawing board for me to better understand. I don't have an answer for you. I believe you're right that it leads to watering down of the number. I don't think that's the leading reason why the numbers are where they are. I think that's probably a contributor, but there's something really big going on that gets half of the workforce by gender to not participate. It's not just the managers putting their name on it. I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, I don't have the data on that, Eric, so I don't know how often it happens. I have heard about that happening at all 3 companies, all in-house companies I've been at. One other thing I would say there is, probably even worse than the example you just gave is I've heard, many female inventors tell me that they have raised their ideas that they want to submit with their managers, and then later find out, their managers have said, nah, we don't think that's worth patenting, and later have found out their managers submitted a patent with their own name on it. So again, really bad. I hope that's not happening frequently. But here's kind of the interesting I've also learned as well. Just as I've heard many female inventors tell me about that terrible experience, I've never heard a male inventor tell me that they asked permission to submit an invention from their manager. For female inventors, more than I can count have told me, oh, when I asked my manager if I could submit it, this is what happened. And I guess one of the observations I now have is like, why are you asking your manager? No male inventor has ever asked their manager. So there's something going on there as well, right? This whole idea of like, I need to ask for permission to participate in the patent program and submit my idea. So again, there's a number of things happening here. I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on and watch out for.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks, Jeremiah. Excellent presentation, really fascinating. I'm wondering, obviously this data you've uncovered amongst the inventor community has implications both within the IP department, which is within your control, and then outside of your control within the inventor community. How do you prioritize between the two? Do you just focus on what's within your control? How do you influence change outside?
I can start with that one, John. I feel like, Richard, it's a great question because, just yesterday I was talking to my team about this, how our scope continues to expand, right? Like we're starting with inventors. That's where we have control. That's where our patent portfolio managers are working every day with our inventors on the front lines. So that's something we have to make sure that, we can address immediately. And they're working most closely with the behavioral science team that we've engaged to look at how they behave, look at how the words they use. Everything is at play. Like I can even tell you, like, one example is, and this is frankly a term I've used for years and years while I practiced, patent harvest sessions. Patent attorneys use this all the time. Hey, inventors, come over to this patent harvest session that we're going to do. This team we've engaged has interviewed a lot of our underrepresented inventors, women and people of color. They are really turned off by harvest. They don't want to be harvested. They don't want their ideas to be harvested. And so anything called a harvest session, they really don't want any part of that. We're getting rid of that word. So there's a lot of these kinds of nudges, these words we use, these practices we use that we need to stop. So that's one area where we're very focused on. But to your point, Richard, about other areas where we have some influence, yes. The patent profession was another area where we said, hey, all the attorneys that we're sending, the outside counsel that we're sending to work with our inventors, they all seem to be white males. Like that's probably not great, especially when our inventors are saying, how come none of our outside counsel look anything like us? Like they're not female, they're not people of color. So all of a sudden, now we're working on this program to see if we can change that. The other area that's even harder is on the business side. Some of our folks are looking at the kind of inventions that are coming from different inventors within certain organizations. And we're not approving a lot of the inventions from our engineers of color or women of color or women engineers. But it may be that the types of inventions coming from them are not as visible or impactful with respect to the products and services we're releasing. It could be an issue more of how come they're not in the right roles? How come they're not on teams or in roles where they could have a bigger impact? And so then it could be talking with the businesses to say, have you looked at your organization to see where you have leadership representation with women and people of color? And what are the groups? We can tell you what are the groups that have the most important or highest value inventions coming out of those areas. Do you have diversity in those teams, on those teams, in those organizations? So now it's also now partnering with those organizations to say, are you promoting diversity on some of the teams and in the roles where they have a chance or an opportunity for bigger impact with respect to technical contribution? So there's a variety of areas we find that there's like scope creep. It keeps expanding because we're finding inequity in all of these areas. And the answer to Richard's question is really wherever we feel like we have a role to play or the ability to raise awareness, we're trying to do that.
So I will just say a couple things. I think getting involved in the inventor diversity issues that I'm seeing both at Uber and now at Lenovo has led me to want to be more involved in other ways as well. And Jeremiah already gave you an example. I think the same thing's happened to Jeremiah. He's like, okay, I'm going to work on inventor diversity, but there's this pipeline problem with diversity in the work in my profession. And so I'm going to do more than just what the pledge is asking of me. I'm going to go out and try to change my profession and make it a better profession by having more diverse people work in my profession. And so I personally experienced that because what I saw, because I serve on the board of my university where I graduated in Houston. I went to school at Rice University. I heard that there was a very high dropout rate for people of color and women in engineering schools because of the pandemic. There's family issues, lots of reasons why this is happening, but it's a very, very significant dropout rate. So I try to volunteer to get companies to hire engineering students, sophomores, juniors, who are diverse. And we raise money, the board will raise money to pay, at least subsidize the salary of those people, because I want there to be a diverse workforce in engineering, just flat out engineering. So I think that getting involved in the inventor diversity issue will probably inspire many of us to get involved in other ways that are unique to us. Like I think Jeremiah's involvement is very commendable, and he's picked a place where he can have impact beyond the pledge. And I'm doing the same at a sort of junior in your career kind of spot. Where I think this is going to go is we use data to be able to really measure what's going on within the inventor pipeline, that little funnel, right? The funnel that Jeremiah showed, the funnel that I showed. There's a world where we have a lot more influence and control. When I started this process, I thought, well, earlier than the funnel, there's the recruiting process. You know, what are we doing to increase diversity of the workforce? And there's how many people are we interviewing that are diverse versus how are we hiring that are diverse? It begs for data to be looked at, right? It begs for that. And then beyond that, there's, well, where are we going? What schools are we going to interview incoming, new job applicants? And what's their diversity of their student body? And so what I predict will happen is that I personally don't think I have the ability, I don't have the credibility as a patent attorney to start by looking at university graduation rates and whether or not Uber or Lenovo or Facebook or anybody else chooses to interview at University A versus University B. People would just come to me and say, who are you to tell me how to recruit? It's not my area of specialty. So I'm going to focus on what I can do right now to demonstrate the model works. And my hope is that people who are in recruiting or people who are in universities will see what we're doing and say, oh, I probably can do the same thing. So I predict what will happen is this will spill out into the larger pipeline, the larger sort of view of how people choose to work, where they choose to go to school, what they do once they get to a company. I think a lot of that can be data driven. It's such an enormous challenge, even at the patent level, that I'm just picking the battle that I think I can win, or at least I can have a contribution to winning. Right? Like I don't think I can change recruiting right now, but in the long run, I think it could lead to a change there. So that's I don't know, Richard, that's an answer to your question or not, but that's at least what I heard from your question. I do think it has broader implications.
It has very much. Thank you. Well, great efforts. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
I think something John said is important, right? We're picking your battles, or in other words, like where you have the ability to bring change. I think about, Vernee Myers is over at Netflix, but she's been, a DEI educator for a while. She kind of described it as your superpower, right? If you can understand where you might have privilege and power, that's a superpower that you have to bring change. Because the truth is, we often look to the marginalized folks to actually carry the laboring oar on creating change in the areas where they might be suffering discrimination or oppression. They don't really have that superpower. They can't, it's much harder for them to bring change. If you've got people like John and others in his position to actually lead that charge, that's where the change can happen. And I also think it's something where once you see it, you really can't unsee it. And so this whole idea, I think that both John and I have experienced, which is, we start with inventor diversity, and now we're looking at any other area where we can get involved too. It's like, once you see the inequity, you can't help but like get involved in that. And for me, I will tell you, it definitely evolved, right? There was a time where a lot of this diversity and inclusion work for me was like, it's like extra credit. It's like a nice thing to do. Now it truly is a responsibility, because we know that people are being left behind and we can't do that. It's not right.
This last real quick thing I'd say is this is just one example of what any leader would do. I think your career, anybody's career can be incredibly stable. And if you just do what you're told, do what you're supposed to do, follow status quo, you can have a very successful career. It's just not that interesting. It's just really not. And if you really want to aspire to be, I don't know, a leader, I guess that term, it just feels weird to say that. But if you want to have more impact in your profession, no matter what it is, whether it's patent law or engineering or something else, you need to be unsatisfied with, you need to see the things that you can improve. And then you need to actually take the initiative to make a difference, to try to work on those improvements. And my belief is that if you do that with anything, it doesn't matter what it is, you're going to find that you're doing that for everything else. It's just going to turn you into a person who wants to make things better. You just pick something, right? So like I've picked the diversity. It's one of the things that I really care about. And so I'm working hard to try to change that. But I think it changes how I interact with people at almost every level in my job. So like, if this isn't your thing, my parting words are find something that you are motivated to change and make that change happen. It doesn't matter what it is, because it's going to make you it's going to make you a more valuable person to whoever's hiring you. It's going to make you more fulfilled. I personally have experienced that. I think the more that I get involved in things like this, the more I see that it makes all the difference for me in my career.
So it looks like we have one more question. Cicero, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, sorry, I got my camera off. I'm laying in bed with flu, but I just wanted to attend this. Jeremiah, you just shared something on what's it called, the patent pipeline program. Okay. Now, speaking about diversity, speaking about the ways that we're trying to get people into these things. First thing I noticed about that is it's only open to U.S. citizens. Okay. Now, I'm Malawi-born, living in Sweden, working for Polestar, and I had that opportunity because, frankly, went to private schools and so on and so forth. But when does that extend? Looking at this opportunity you've got there, when does that extend further than just the U.S. underprivileged?
Yeah, Jeremiah.
I love it because I love the impatience. It sounds like you're similar to John. You're impatient.
Yes.
The easiest answer is we have work to do. Why did I can answer another question that you may not be asking. Why did we start there? Like just US? That's the program that we have to work with. So NCPP was started by a guy named Braxton Davis. I actually just hired him on my team. He started about 10 years ago. And what he saw was this real need in the US first, because that's where he is, right? And he was seeing, it almost was by happenstance that he stumbled upon this profession of patent law, and he loves it and was like, I don't see any people who look like me. And he's a black man, currently in Atlanta. So he started this and about 10 years ago, and it's had great progress in terms of training STEM students with degrees in technical fields on getting certified as patent prosecution professionals. And they've been able to use that certification to get employment and do all sorts of things. When we hired him earlier this year, one of the first conversations he had with me was, I want to take this to the next level. And I said, what do you have in mind? And this guy's a dreamer, right? And so he said, I want to give them full-time employment. They're coming into our program. We're giving them free training, but they have to work so hard. Patent prosecution is not a simple thing you can just like do for a day and then all of a sudden you know how to do it. It's a lot of work. And so he said, I want to reward them with something and create this ecosystem of a pipeline where we can actually give them full-time employment if they do well in the program. And so that's what we've done. And so I guess, going back to your question, Cicero, is it's step by step. I hope we can make it as inclusive as possible. This is where we are now. The first step, I think, is kind of changing the face of the patent profession in the United States, because we have pretty significant underrepresentation of women and people of color. I'd love to see that completely change. And then I'd love to go on to the rest of the world.
I think I tease Jeremiah because I said nearly the same thing about a different issue to him about how, like, why don't you do this for people who haven't graduated college yet? give them a career track before they graduate so they stay in STEM programs. So it's great.
And by the way, John, after you said that, what happened? I think we actually flexed the rules a bit to accommodate.
Yeah. It's great. It's awesome. So I think I'm not going to volunteer Jeremiah for anything more than he's already doing. He's doing a million things, but I think if there were companies in, Polestar is also Sweden, right? So I think if there were a collection of companies that wanted to mirror or follow the model that Jeremiah worked on with NCPP, I suspect that you would have people very willing to help you get some momentum. So there is a huge community. It's a growing community. And I really appreciate your impatience and your question. I think it's awesome. So please turn that into an action, and I'll help you. I'll do whatever I can to help you out. I think Jeremiah will too. So
well, let me actually make a plug for another program that we have, which is something called Pledge Supporters. And that is another way to actually expand this program. Pledge supporters are companies like law firms, academic institutions, consulting firms who may not have an inventorship process that they're running themselves, but they participate with client companies. And so we're looking to engage those. We have about 40 of those in the US right now. And part of bringing this program to Europe is to get those companies to be a part of it, which will allow us, Cicero, to expand this program to help companies and law firms here in Europe. So again, I think you hit us up a little bit later if you want to have any ideas of where we may go and how we can expand that. We're really open to it, but that's probably a good way to do that, is utilize those kind of pledge supporter roles.
Thank you so much.
Great. Well, I think we have gone a half an hour over time. I really appreciate you guys staying late. It was really good of you. Jeremiah and John, thank you so much. You're awesome as always. And, please, like we're saying, it's a movement. And really, I think we would ask you all to come join us. It's really fun. It's intellectually interesting, and you're doing good, right? I mean, all those things are fantastic, and you're really helping your company. So, any questions for that? We would happy to interface and do whatever we can do. So ask away, go to increasingdii.org. You can see a lot of, what we're doing and a lot of anything you need to get started. I don't know, John, Jeremiah, anything else you want to add here?
I just added my email address in the chat in case people want to reach out to me. So yeah, that's it for me.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.